Hey everybody, it's time for The Plot Hole with your hosts, Johnny O and Jeremy Flair.
Are you gay?
Coming at you live.
We'll do it live! Fuck it!
Every Friday night at 8.
Every Friday night at 8.
On rockmetaltalk.com.
I went with jockeys here.
Something stinks like stale French fries.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
I killed your cat, you druggy bitch!
Do it.
I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown. I amuse you. I make you laugh. I'm here to fucking amuse you. How the fuck am I funny? What the fuck is so funny about me? Tell me. Tell me what's funny.
Tell me what's so funny. Hey, everybody. It's Friday night, 8 o'clock. Well, almost 8 o'clock, 8:30-ish. It's time for The Plot Hole. You're on rockmetaltalk.com. I'm Johnny O. I'm one of your humble hosts. And behind me, let's see if they're talking. Let's see if they're talking on Skype. 1 second. Oh, look at that. They weren't talking. Amazing. All right, so with me we've got Keith the Beast. What are we calling him, JL? Special K.
Special K.
There it is. Special K. Keith, where you at? He went quiet. Keith just went quiet. I think he's looking at Discord.
He's probably got the microphone in his pants again.
Oh lordy, Keith, don't put it in the pants. Of course, that awesome voice is the wonderful JL Warren. Say hello, JL.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me back again.
Absolutely. And with JL in the room, we've got Jeff. Jeff, say hello.
How's it going?
All right. Good to have you on the show. Today we're going to... See, he's on Discord. My goodness, Keith. Anyway, we're going to get Keith back in here. He'll figure it out. Silly guy. All right, a couple things, couple of quick announcements. Again, you're on Rock. I just had what was that Minnesota reporter? Dare say Gederst. Very Gedersk. Felt bad for that lady when she did that shit. You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
It's a shame. It happens sometimes.
Yeah, well, she had a stroke on live television.
Yeah.
There he is. There's the Grober.
Son of a gun.
Keith, you might have to turn your... There we go. All right. Sweet.
We're on Skype, man.
Yeah.
We're on Skype.
Yeah, I told you we were going to be on Skype. This is what happens when you don't leave.
Look, man, I didn't listen.
It happens. All right. Quick announcements. June 5th, next week, we are going to have Professor Dave from Professor Dave Explains. He's going to come on for a quick chat. I'm going to talk to him about the goings-on, some of the people that he's had the pleasure of meeting, discussing, debating, etc. Should be an awesome show. Be sure to tune in for that one. If you want to contribute to the show, you can do so 2 places. You can go to theplothole.com. You can donate $1, $1 bazillion, whatever you want to do. Or you could buy our merchandise. We have T-shirts. We have mugs. Preferably $1 bazillion if you have an extra $1 bazillion lying around. That'd be awesome.
I know I do.
I'm sure my dogs are going to start yelling at people outside any second now. So if that happens, forgive me. Second place, you can go to Patreon, www.patreon.com/theplothole1. That's the plot hole number 1, not ONE, where you can become like the Oneaters. Whereas for as little as $1 a month, you can become a plot hole producer. Go check it out. Let us know. And of course, you can always check us out on the YouTubes, youtube.com/c/theplothole. I just released a video on the Wee Man, Nathan Thompson, and CC Chris from whatever the fuck he's from, some New York bullshit. Go check it out. Tell me what you think. All right, now that we got all that bullshit out of the way, what are we doing here today, Keith?
Today we are having a discussion about continuing what we did last week. This time last week about morality.
That's right. So what we're going to do...
It's an interesting discussion because it can be you know, twisted, turn-tied, tongue-tied in any which direction. But it's actually a very good one because there's so many ways to think about it. So, we've had pretty good dialogue that we've started, and I'm really excited just to hear.
This should be a lot of fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this. This is a little bit more of a structured debate. Unlike last week was more of just a discussion. So we're actually going to have a 10, 10, 40, 30 structure. Each one of our presenters is going to give 10 minutes of their evidence or their position, and then we'll get into a 40-minute question and answer, or not question and answer, 40-minute open discussion session, and then we'll hit some Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, be sure to put them in the Discord.
Please do.
Yes, put them in the Discord or go to theplothole.com, and you can always quote super chat them that way. That'll be awesome. With that, Jeff, you are the guest, so I am going to give you the floor. Let me know when you're ready. I'll get my timer ready, and then you can just get on after it.
Sounds good. How's my audio? Is it am I coming through okay?
Yes, hear you loud and clear.
Great. I'm not sure I can make it to 10 minutes. It's pretty short and simple. But,
that's okay.
I think we'll stretch it out a little bit.
That's okay. You don't have to take the full 10 minutes. I wanted to give everybody 10 minutes. That way they had enough time to get everything they wanted to say. I didn't feel like they were rushed.
Gotcha.
So if you're ready,
yep.
The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful to introduce myself and add a little bit of my background. It really helps to explain the development of my viewpoint. I'm sort of an average Christian. In some cases, I am not average at all. There's a lot of Christians out there who will disagree with my viewpoints. I think they're pretty common. I'll let you all research that. I'm actually a former agnostic, converted to Christianity approximately 15 years ago. I still retain some of my agnostic tendencies, especially when it comes to questioning doctrines, or especially morals. In college, I fell in love with the idea of deontological ethics, especially Kant's categorical imperative. I eventually became aware of some of the errors of the moral framework that were exposed by some infamous moral dilemmas. I can probably go into that in more detail if necessary. I just assume that is pretty well known. Later, I examined utilitarianism, but to me it seems apparent that it also has a number of dilemmas that expose laws. Lately, I've begun to examine the entire process of examining moral frameworks and essentially rejecting them in more of a meta-ethical sense. To me, it seems apparent that I was rejecting these ethical frameworks on the basis of a gut reaction to perceived cruelties or horrible conclusions that were exposed through these moral dilemmas. I'm not a philosopher by any means, but my training in the use of logic as a programmer has most definitely led me to question the nature of the relationship between reason and morality. I realize that as it is with any new solution, one might be implementing to solve a given problem, in a sense similar to ironing out a rational theory and testing it with moral dilemmas. Algorithms can typically be tested with edge cases. But in the case of programming, logic is never really considered to be truth itself. It's really only ever used as a tool, a useful tool. But, so why are we so eager to treat the use of reason in philosophy with such high regard? That's really not an easy question to answer. I think it really kind of boils down to culture and some things that we inherited from the philosophical traditions of the West. But the important point here is, as it pertains to the question at hand, is that logic itself is cold and it's calculated. It is, in a sense, heartless. And the basis I found myself to be appealing to when rejecting rationally defined ethical frameworks was itself non-rational. In other words, it dawned on me that no matter how perfect one's use of reason may be, humanity's sense of morality is emotional, it's biological, and it's as real as human nature itself. So that leads me to more moral dilemmas. There's plenty to go around. You can easily imagine that we're all living in a lawless state, kind of like the Wild West. It's easy to imagine that we might quickly begin to out at least a few characters as being morally subpar for whatever actions they may choose to take against others in a lawless context. And some of the conclusions that might lead us to, as distasteful as it may seem, this is the pattern that I employed over the years. Really, if humanity's innate sense of morality is biologically determined, should that lead us to a belief in a genetically determined sort of moral superiority? Again, I think that's somewhat of a moral dilemma in and of itself. But personally, I will say that it's my belief, I think it can be shown fairly easily, that the ancient Hebrew scriptures, also known as the Old Testament, fantastically reflect the picture that I just described. It even appeals to an emotional basis for morality of a sort in at least a few places where it gives various admonishments to people to rend their hearts, etc. Early Christianity, by extension, not only reaffirms something like an emotional basis of morality by teaching that the moral law is contingent upon commandments to love, but it also takes this much further so as to address the inherent moral dilemmas we're left with by asserting that humanity as a whole is more or less morally degenerate to some degree. So there's almost a need that it presents to escape the degeneracy that we all face. And then it additionally posits that the solution actually is to be unified in some mysterious sense to the being of God, who is asserted to be of good moral character. Now, I can't personally prove, I'm not going to try to prove a case that morality comes from God, because the agnostic in me already knows that that's a fool's errand. I mean, I would have to first prove the existence of God. That's not going to happen in 10 minutes. But I think it's actually much easier to show some of the weaknesses of the use of reason alone to attempt to define morality, and also that approach, at least in the modern era, seems to be a necessary starting point for exploring original or early Christian morality.
Is that where you wish to stop?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Stop that there. Boom. JL, are you ready?
Yes, sir, I am.
All right, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'm JL. I'm a co-host on the Weekend Horror Podcast, and when I'm not nerding out on horror movies, I'm usually engaging in debates on the interwebs. First, I'd like to thank the Plot Hole and Nano for this, Jeff for this debate. I know you were Nano on Discord. Morality and its myriad effects on society is a topic I've long had a great amount of interest in. So Many arguments occur over the subject of morality. The most interesting of which is it objective, meaning conditional on a single source, or is it subjective, meaning conditional to the individual? Now, unlike descriptors of reality, such as mathematical proofs, the laws of logic, or the laws of physics, morality is a bit more difficult to nail down, and for a number of reasons. However, in spite of this difficulty, we can pin it down, dissect it, eschew the personal truths we have adopted, and discover the objective truth behind it all. So, let's set our initial foundation by looking at the definition of morality. The standard definition of morality is a particular system of values and principles of conduct, especially one held by a specified person or society. Morality has also been defined as the conception of what we ought to do because it is good and what we ought not do because it is bad. And here we begin to see that by the use of undefinable terms such as good, bad, or ought, morality is subjective by its very definition. But we must go further than this. We cannot maintain intellectual honesty by just dismissing something by the subjective nature of its definition. Let's start with Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask what is it in itself? So in itself, we can accept a few things that we can observe or demonstrate about morality. Number one, morality is not a universal constant. There are no demonstrations of morality outside of what we see here on our planet. And while absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, it does hold the same logical value as non-existence and must be treated as such until evidence is presented. Number two, morality fundamentally changes from society to society, as evidenced throughout human history by the great human cultures that have inhabited the planet, from the Akkadians to the Egyptians, from the Spartans to feudal Japan, from the early Anglo-Saxons to modern society today. Number three, animals capable of higher reasoning, such as the cetaceans and the great apes, often display a human comparable morality. They're social groups engaging in resource sharing, mutual protection of the young, and rudimentary forms of justice. Humans, currently, as demonstrated by the evidence, possess the most complex moral system of all social species groups on Earth today. And number five, we can demonstrate that the basic premises of any moral system, such as do not murder or do not steal or do not lie, are deeply rooted in the behavioral tactics for survival that we as a social species learned over the past 250,000 years. Those very tactics that aided in keeping us alive as we competed with our human cousins, Neanderthal, Erectus, Floresiensis, Naledi, etc., for ultimate survival. Tactics that derive from complex thought and communication, which are all seated in our evolved frontal lobes. Now, given this evidence, we then look at the very nature of morality. So morality cannot be touched, but it can be felt emotionally. This classifies morality as an abstract idea, the same family of ideas that include truth, justice, liberty, innocence, guilt. Now, unlike some more complex abstracts, morality can be broken down with just a little logic and effort. We observe and can demonstrate that there is a strong correlation between the abstract construct that we call morality and an animal's or our ability to reason, an ability which is governed by the development of the frontal lobe, an area of the brain that also governs higher cognition and expressive language. Now, given these physical, emotional, and societal parameters, we can logically conclude that morality, that particular system of values and principles of conduct held by society, that the most logically consistent conclusion that can be made in accordance with the demonstrable evidence is that morality, as an abstract idea, is wholly subjective. Its parameters determined by the societal trends of the time. The concept of objective morality, that those same values and principles are derived or contingent upon an exterior or singular source, is logically unsound because any conclusions drawn from an undemonstrable, unfalsifiable, or presupposed claim are not justifiable or reasonable. And I'll yield the rest of my time.
All right. That was some good fun. I like what both of you guys have to say on the matters. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the open discussion portion, and we are going to let you two go at it. We're going to keep this, of course, I believe that both of you guys will be able to keep this cordial. Light name calling is encouraged. I'm kidding, of course. Let's have a good time with this. So with that, I will open it up to Jeff. If you have questions or concerns, bring it on over and let me hear what you got to say.
Yeah, I guess the first question that jumps to my the forefront of my attention really as I was listening to the other side of the argument here is would you assume that we can safely assume or conclude even that human nature is something that is objective?
No, human nature is wholly subjective because while there are constants within human nature, such as the survival imperative, emotions are what primarily drive us. Our emotional reactions to stimuli, and those emotional reactions vary from individual to individual, making them wholly subjective.
I think that's interesting. I personally do think that the commonalities, though, wouldn't they constitute something that is at least somewhat objective to some degree? I find it difficult to define, actually. But
Well,
go ahead.
we may be treading over the line where objectivity, meaning deriving from a single source, or objective, meaning goal oriented. There can be some confusion there. So we may be treading into goal oriented. So the constants of human behavior, survival imperative, reproduction, seeking food, seeking shelter, that these are common behaviors that are designed that we evolve through to keep us alive. So you could say that those are objectives as they are goals.
An objective is okay. I understand that. But I'm referring to objectivity, as compared to subjectivity. Well, that's fine. I tend to look at human nature as something that is biological in a sense. There's something about reality in and of itself. I really am trying to avoid the rabbit hole of epistemology here, but it seems to me that reason itself seems to betray us to a degree, and that whatever is simply is. You and I both we're aggregates of material. I can't really rationally define you, and I suspect you can't rationally define whatever it is that constitutes me. But we both have a general sense of, we have a general sense or an understanding that certain elements come into play, and there's quite a lot of complexity involved. Can it be rationally defined? I don't know if it can be. I'm not sure that we can necessarily rationally define something that is actually materially present in the real world without perfectly simulating the existence of that entity down to the molecular level and probably even further. So my anti-philosophical tendencies kick in here, and this is where I start to doubt the, I guess you could say, or question the extent to which reason itself is even useful. Certainly, it's a good tool. It's a wonderful tool. We can use it to test propositions. I don't think we can really conclude very much about the real nature of things using reason alone. We need empiricism. We need science. We need data for that.
Well, reason is one of the best tools because it's one of the our ability to reason as a species is probably one of the best the best pieces of evidence as to why we survived over the past 250,000 years and we outlived our cousins. Our ability to reason was better than others, better than any of the other human species or the human cousins that we had. And that comes from the greater evolution of our frontal lobes, our ability to communicate more complexly, our ability to reason, our ability to logic, our ability to formulate abstract ideas. And I think where you're going along is that you can rationalize it in a sense that all of our moral systems, although there are many of them, and many of them are vastly different, and they hold different things to higher standards and to greater moral or I guess greater moral standards, but they're all predominantly based in the behavioral traits that we learned over time and we've adopted as a social species, and we pass down to our young, and each generation learns from the next. And that as we evolved and our brains evolved, we began to apply the moral framework to those natural behavioral standards that we learned as a social species. And so we can see the root of our moral systems, and then highly dependent upon the society in which they derive, those moral frameworks begin to evolve in different areas themselves, which is why we see such fundamentally different moral frameworks throughout history and throughout different societies.
Yeah, fair enough. I personally tend to agree with a lot of what you've already said. I do think that the moral framework concept in and of itself does lead to some fallacious conclusions, and that's actually the basis of a lot of my argumentation. What I would like to talk about, though, I guess I would say, assuming that Christianity is true. Again, I'm not going to attempt to approach the Herculean task of proving that it is true, but just assuming that it is true. I do kind of wish to point out that very clearly, if you take Paul at face value, he does assent to a kind of moral objectivity, something that could probably be described as moral objectivism. And again, assuming that it is true, assuming Christianity is true and his belief in God is not erroneous, assuming that God does exist and a person is made to be, in some sense, more morally tuned, in a sense, through some kind of a mystical union with God. This goes back to classical Christian orthodoxy, really. I would have to say it must be true then that moral objectivity is the correct view of morality.
Well, the problem therein being is that when citing something from the Bible, and we look at, and not I don't want to drive down the road of the historicity of the Bible, but we do have to look at the when and the why it was written at the time. And so we know that the Bible is a reflection of a particular area of the world in its undeveloped state. I don't really think we can derive any solid conclusions from the theories of Bronze Age Palestinians who had no conceptual idea of what the planet was. But we look at what was going on in the rest of the world at the same time, because while these things were being taken down in the Middle East, which then formulated the chapters of the Bible, wherever you want to go with that, there were other cultures that were alive at the same time that these individuals were not in contact with. And we know that the Egyptians, we know that the Chinese, we know that the Japanese, we know that they actually predate Christianity by their cultures by many, many years. And they have their own particular moral frameworks that they derive, their own theories and hypotheses as to the fundamental workings of the universe and the cosmos and our place in it. So we round that circle, looking at it from an objective standpoint. We try to derive truth, using our natural skeptical nature. We derive truth from it. We try to ascertain who has the better kind of understanding of it. And we can objectively say that the Chinese had a better and had a stronger understanding of the cosmos and a stronger understanding of our place in it than the Palestinians did, or did anyone in the Middle East. So,
may I interject?
Oh yeah, feel free.
Because they are a more ancient culture, and
no, I'm just saying they had started up, that their society had begun before the societies in which the Bible generated from, because the society that generated the chapters of the Bible is not one of the oldest societies. In fact, the Akkadians had a very, very strong moral framework. Now, they were a polytheistic society. They gave birth to the Mesopotamians. Mesopotamians then spread out. We get the Egyptians, and we get everything coming out there as humans spread across the planet. But each one of them held their own moral frameworks, and the societies that broke away from them, they picked and chose what they wanted from those that sat with them better. But then we go across the continent to countries that they didn't even know existed at the time, like like China, like feudal China, and we see that their emperor was their god, and this is the society they lived in, and they held certain things like ritual suicide as a high moral imperative, which was not held as an imperative.
Why do you, JL? Why do you
Hey,
think
Keith.
that was?
Keith, let's hang out. Let's hold off our questions. Let's let Jeff and JL kind of guide this portion, and then we'll get in our questions in the Q&A here in a minute.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So what we see is different moral frameworks popping up from their rudimentary beginnings, and the rudimentary beginnings are always in the behavioral traits or the behaviors that we picked up as we were evolving into the societies we are today. When we went from small tribes to the grand societies we have, we learned behavioral or systems of behavior that helped us to survive, like boundaries. And you don't take my food, I don't take your food. You don't touch my female, I don't touch your female. You don't harm my children, and so forth. And these basic rudimentary behaviors that kept us alive and our ability to communicate them better than other human cousins allowed us to outsurvive them and outlast them, and then evolve into the size we have today, which we begin to comport our abstract ideas about the cosmos into our moral framework, into our behavioral frameworks, to create moral systems to justify those behaviors.
From a social evolution standpoint, okay, sure, yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with that. Commonly accepted opinion on that, at least. Clearly, though, people of faith, especially of the Christian tradition, might not be so inclined to adopt a evolutionary standpoint. I personally, am of mixed opinion. I mean, I think that goes into a fog of history that it really requires a lot of assumptions. Even trying to divorce myself from my theistic assumptions, I still think that a lot of the propositions that are made by a lot of the modern academics on the subject seem a little preposterous to me. For one, I do not understand how it is that monotheism can be a later stage of evolution.
Oh, that's actually that. Are you saying how monotheism came after polytheism?
Right.
That's actually really. Oh, sorry. That's actually really easily explained.
Hang on, JL. Let's let him finish his point.
Oh, okay.
Let him finish his point.
Yeah.
It seems that monotheism is inherently simpler. Polytheism seems to be skipping a few steps there. I'll leave it at that. Like, as if monotheism could be a building block for a later stage of polytheism. I could understand that, but saying that it went from polytheism to monotheism, it just seems to be skipping steps to me. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh well, it's actually really well explained in behavioral evolution and in archaeology. All we have to do, the best example is all we have to do is go back and look at the indigenous Americans here and how and their polytheistic society. So humans, as they began to try and understand the world, like, why does a thing happen? Why does this occur like this? Why does this happen like this? Began to attribute powers, greater powers than them, to the phenomena around them that they did not fully comprehend. So polytheistic societies like ancient Greece and the Norse and the Swedish and ancient Rome, let's go further back to the Egyptians, to the ancient Egyptians, to the Akkadians, to pretty much everything that grew out of Mesopotamia, is that functions of the planet, functions of the world that we did not understand, we attributed powers to try and give understanding to them. So when lightning struck the ground and set a crop on fire, we didn't understand why that happened at that particular time. So we tried to put powers behind it that are beyond our understanding. It's we basically fell prey to the God of the gaps fallacy.
JL, are you describing like Neanderthal evolution?
No. I'm going beyond that. By this point, Neanderthals had all died out.
When a lightning strikes and it hits a tree, and we have fire, and we've never seen fire before.
You could say that would be an early representation of it, whereas in the lightning comes out of the clouds. We don't know where it came from. It sets fire to the tree. We don't know where the fire came from. We don't understand the nature, the relationship between the two. That lightning is heat, heat burns wood, wood catches fire, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we attribute, basically, we kind of give personifications to the powers behind these things because we don't understand where they come from, and each individual thing gets its own power. So if you look at the indigenous Americans, all of the tribes across North America, they all had polytheistic societies, and every single thing, it was the sun, it was the moon, it was the sky, it was the wind, it was the rain, it was all the individual animals. Everything they encountered had a source behind it that was different from all the other sources. And then someone surmised, oh, well, there must be something to bring this all together. And there was the Great Spirit above all that empowers all other things. Okay, so
I kind of see what you're saying. Yeah, but in that sense, wouldn't it be monotheism at some point, then polytheism, and then back to monotheism? Because that's really what it sounds like.
Well, it started as polytheism, explanations for all the varying things, and then began to boil down to monotheism, whereas it was just simply having one God above all other gods, because certain societies or certain small groups within society may not agree with this particular God, or we may have understood something. So as we begin to understand storms, we realize we don't need Thor or whatever is behind that. As we begin to understand the moon, we don't need the gods behind it. So gods begin to drop off, and they drop off one by one until we're left with one God behind everything, or one ultimate power behind everything that explains everything that we don't understand.
Right. Yeah, I've heard this perspective before. I'm of a different opinion. I'll just leave it at that. I tend to think that. I guess you could say my approach to analyzing some of the more ancient aspects of especially Christianity and Judaism is to assume that human nature hasn't really changed a whole lot, and that we can take some examples from the modern day because it's absolutely necessary. I think that assumptions that human nature was substantially different for ancient peoples is a big assumption to make. Not that I think that we should be reading modern day issues into the past. That would be a mistake as well. But I do think that we can take some some observations of fundamental aspects of human nature and extrapolate some of the things that we can or could reasonably expect of ancient peoples. I look at the Catholic Church as an example. And right now they're a unified religion. They're a very complex religion, though. There's a number of individuals that they tend to venerate, saints and whatnot. And looking at it as from a kind of a sociological viewpoint, this is all, this is not endorsed by anyone or anything. This is all my own personal opinion. So keep that in mind. If you were to assume that the Catholic religion, for some unbeknownst reason, lost the core of its faith so that there was nothing unifying it, but it still maintains some semblance of its original structure, given that there are a number of umbrella groups, or shall I say subgroups under the umbrella, that's a better way of putting it, a number of notable individuals whom they venerate, over the course of a few hundred years, maybe a little bit further, assuming that they lost the core of their faith, they were no longer unified, would it look like polytheism? I think it would.
I could agree with that. If you give it 1,000 years of if us looking back at the Catholic Church, I could see that it could be seen as a polytheistic kind of expression of belief structures. Yeah.
So from a kind of out of the box theory, if you will, personally, I find that it seems much more likely to me for a religion that was once unified, that once resembled something completely different, and actually, at its core, is a bit simpler. I know we can go into Trinitarianism and all the complexities of that, but let's just assume there was a religion that had a simpler belief at its core, fell apart, became something that looked like polytheism, and gave rise to the religious landscape that is roughly described in the ancient Hebrew texts. It would at least provide a feasible way of getting there. And I personally, I think that's just my own opinion. I think that is a lot more reasonable than something that, just the academic perspective on this honestly does not make any sense to me. It seems like it's not really a science, if you will. I think that my personal theory seems to make more sense in my head, the way I'm thinking of it. I'll just leave it at that because at this point we're really only putting forth conjecture. What else can we do? Maybe we can find some archaeological evidence, and that will be the end of it. But I'll just leave it at that.
So, but ultimately, I think ultimately the purpose of the debate is I'm a moral subjectivist, and I'm a moral subjectivist based upon the evidence and based on the fact that I'm an atheist. Would you say that you are an objective moralist?
I believe the term is moral objectivist.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not grounded on reason. So I don't have I do not have a rational basis for it. My personal basis for my own personal viewpoint is grounded.
May I interject just as the moderator? A objective or moral basis. Can you expand upon that?
A moral basis for my belief?
Yes, sir. I'm just curious.
I would personally consider it to be an empirical basis for my belief.
Okay.
It is based on personal experience. I do not necessarily think that constitutes a moral basis for my belief.
You said rational. Okay, I'm taking notes. I'm sorry. I'm a rabid note taker as on this side on the plot hole. So
sure. Yeah. Sorry, I'm mixing up.
But continue. Continue, please.
That happens when the phone gets derailed, I guess.
So let me jump to that. What you basically said is that. And
is the gentleman done? Or
well, hang on a second. Again, Keith, let's let them hash it out. We got a Q&A coming up here in just a few minutes.
Okay.
So going off of what you said, Jeff, that. And it's remarkably admirable. I got to give you the biggest of props, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass, but to be able to accept and acknowledge that your position is not rational, though you feel it, so you accept it. There's not a lot of people that that can own up to that. So well done on you for having the reasonability to see that.
Bravo.
I'm just kind of curious as to when you know it's reasonable, how do you justify it? Because being that it's unreasonable and being that it's based upon your emotional experience. Now, I don't want to get into subjective experiences because it would be intellectually dishonest for me to tell you what you felt or what you didn't feel. I simply disagree with your interpretation of what you experienced. But
Okay.
how do you justify something that you know comes from an unreasonable place? How do you know that you've arrived at the truth?
Well, I think you have to be careful with the term unreasonable. I was fairly deliberate in saying non-rational, not irrational, but not rational. Okay, so it would be something other than reason itself,
Well,
not necessarily.
real quick, just for
counter-
clarification, can you explain the differences in what you mean, or is that what you're doing right now?
That's what I'm attempting to do right now.
Okay, I apologize.
Right, okay. So clearly there are aspects to your being as a human that are not rational. I think we could probably summarize it as that. How
I
can
think we can all agree
Yeah.
on that
Right.
on that point.
Exactly. I think that people listening to music experience something that might not be necessarily defined by reason itself. We could probably do some analysis using various instrumentation to take a look at um, thought patterns and whatnot, and the physical effects that music produces to a person's body as they are experiencing music. But can we rationally define it? I think we're trying to cross a divide there that's not very easily bridged with our ability to reason. Um,
Well,
What
I'd actually have to disagree with you on that, just very briefly. I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but I
okay.
believe that with what we know about neurology and how the brain wires itself from gestation to birth to childhood and all through, how the brain functions as an organic computer and the connections it makes neurologically, I think we can eventually come to a greater understanding. While we're not 100% there yet, we do understand how the brain wires itself and how the brain connects different experiences to different pathways, different neurological pathways. But we have a basic understanding of it now, and I would say probably 50 to 100 years we may understand it better. But I think that's the road to understanding it, to understanding the reasonability of how the brain functions. It's simply the emotions that are generated which can be declared as unreasonable because because they may not have a specific source, or they may not be understood or justified, but those are the subjective emotions in which our abstract ideas are informed.
That's a very good point. I do not necessarily disagree with you. As a programmer and as somebody who has implemented my own artificial neural network, I can see the merit to your argument, but at the same time, that's the exact reason why I started to lose faith in our ability to reason. It's because we're not there 100%. That's why I see a limitation.
Agreed, and I actually agree with you. If we relied solely upon our ability to reason, we would. I would be comfortable in saying we would objectively fail. That is why we use two paths. We use the descriptors of reality that we understand, such as the laws of logic and the laws of physics, and those things that we view as constants. We can't say that they're absolutes, but we can say that these are constants that don't change. So these constants of reality, like the laws of logic, the laws of physics, the language of mathematics, we take these bases that we now understand and we mesh them with our reasonability and use logic to derive as truthful a conclusion as we can get to.
Okay. So yes, we are able to make very good approximations. I would agree with you on that. In fact, I think that our minds are capable of simulating reality itself. I mean, that is what we experience. It's almost a simulation. But
May I ask
yeah,
a question, Johnny?
yes.
I don't know if he's here. I'm going to do it.
I'm always here.
Okay. Just a question. So you mentioned, the mind thoughts and simulations. Do you feel that perhaps when one taps into, either mind, body, spirit, or just singular minded, or singular spirited, or singular body, that they can interpret and create a new reality for themselves to create a sense of morality?
Were you asking me?
Uh, uh, okay. If
I heard
a
the
person,
question. I just wasn't sure if I was addressed.
so, yeah, that was for you.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Well, I think the mind
And
has the power.
if you, I'm all ear. We're all ears here at the plot hole. So
Sure. I hear you.
yeah.
I think that certainly what we experience subjectively can be just as real as anything else. But I do tend to think that let's just say, for instance, the mind derails in some sense. Even though a mentally ill person can experience a reality that's local to themselves, it lies to them. Okay, that in my mind would represent uh, a failure in hardware. Okay, it is falling short of what has evolved essentially, at least according to the theory of evolution, right? If you want to assume that evolution is true, I assume you guys do.
Well, it's not really an assumption.
No. There's no assumptions here.
Hang on. Let's let him finish his point. Let him finish his point. Let's let him finish his point.
Okay.
No, I was trying to progress him along. So yeah, or progress Keith along on this, because I think Keith came from a different perspective and was going down a different trail than we were going. So
Sure. Okay. Well, in any case, I personally interpret that sort of a scenario to be a malfunction in the biological hardware that is there to help us keep us alive. I mean, however it is that we came to be how we are, it doesn't come with guarantees of a perfect model of reality.
we would say an atypical presentation.
Sure.
There's the typical presentation and the atypical presentation, which someone with a mental illness or a type of cognitive dissonance would be an atypical presentation or an atypical understanding of reality.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. I would not call it a reality in and of itself, although it may be experienced as one. And in effect, it is part of reality. I mean, if you want to look at it at a meta sense, it is in and of itself part of reality.
It is a facet. I can agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. What I would say is, in response to that question, this is not exactly what you were getting at, but this actually kind of loops back to our Western philosophical tradition and what the early philosophers were trying to get at. What I think that Christians are attempting to express in not so philosophical terms, I'm talking about early Christianity, is that we are essentially some kind of something that transcends matter itself. And coming from my agnostic background and education and all that, I have two sides to myself. Yeah, I'm a person of faith, but the other side of myself says that I don't think that they're necessarily wrong. Reason being is that I think we're all more than material. We are the formation of material. We are material that is information, which is not so different than a pattern or information itself. And when it comes to what information actually is, if you want to delve into the realm of quantum mechanics, it seems to, I guess you could say, the line between permanence and impermanence becomes blurred. Okay, I mean, even if you were to replace all the material that's in your body, but if it were in the exact formation that it is now, would you still be you? I think you would.
Well, it's an interesting take on that. I think that if the experiences were the same, yes. For example, just to play on it, I know that there was an article that was released recently about how particle physicists have recently discovered it's a very rudimentary hypothesis that there could be a parallel universe to ours, and it running backwards, basically a mirror universe that where time runs backwards, where everything is reversed, just based upon how particles move. And it's a very, very rudimentary hypothesis. They're still working it, but that individual who, if there was a doppelganger of myself that lived over there, and they, fundamentally the building blocks are exactly the same, came from the same parents who were like this. The would it fundamentally be me? I don't think so, because the experiences, by their nature being subjective and the emotional subjectivity, would be different to a degree, even to an almost minimal degree, but it would not be me. So if the experiences were exactly the same and the emotional reaction to those experiences were the same, then I would say yes.
Well, I guess we don't know until we try, but
yeah. Ultimately, you are correct that we are all fundamentally built of the same stuff. So our DNA is a constant across the planet amongst all organic life, and pretty much across all life. DNA is the same. It's a double helix. It's how it formed. DNA is composed of the same 4 amino acids, and it simply is a code, or just coding, that expresses itself in different ways. The expressions of those dictated through evolution, and dictated through 4 billion years of evolution. So, but we know that the building blocks that compose us are literally scattered across the universe. They are the most plentiful elements across the universe. And to think that there's something sort of special about life generating here on this planet, when in actuality it took a very narrow window for life to crop up on this planet, and that window is closing very rapidly in a cosmic sense. That this planet will no longer be able to sustain life simply by the geological procession of the Earth. That there's a very small window that this planet can sustain us, and eventually it will stop sustaining all life, just by the sheer age, just how planets age and how the stars age, how our sun will age. But this system, given the infinite age, given the mathematics of the universe, it's virtually guaranteed that this has happened many, many times across. So there's nothing special about it. But our ability to feel like we're special simply because we're all alone, or simply because we haven't encountered anything intelligent beyond us to our degree, we don't want to fall into that false sense of security in that we are special simply because we are alone, or we think that we are alone.
May I interject?
Yeah, feel free. Yeah, I'd stop there.
Yeah. So do you? So that being said, it's almost an age-old question of do we base our structures upon fear that
Absolutely.
We are alone, and we wonder what's going to happen in the next step. I mean, whether you be an atheist, a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a person from Islamic faith, do we structure a lot of our, and this is, I don't know. I just pose questions. I don't have any interjections.
Well, you think about it. You think about it in this respect. All of the conclusions.
But do both parties understand the question I'm asking?
Yeah, you think about it in this respect. Human beings have long complete. Okay, let me start from this perspective. The brain has the ability to create patterns out of chaos. It's called pareidolia and apophenia, and that is a survival tactic that we evolved in order just basically to help us survive. 150,000 years ago, if you saw the grass rustling in the field, that could be a cave, that could be a lion, but it might not be. You don't know. But your pareidolia says, oh, the pattern matches. That could be a lion, and you run away and you survive. The one who said, I think that's just the wind, and he strides over there and gets eaten by a lion, he didn't survive to pass on his genes. So these are survival tactics. These are survival traits that our brains developed. Now, if you apply those same pattern-seeking behaviors to abstract ideas, we begin to insert answers to questions that we do not readily have the answers for. So just like your brain will look at the four corners on a screen and will automatically complete the square. Everyone's familiar with that optic illusion. We do the same thing when looking at patterns in nature, and we seek to understand. And if we can't readily ascertain an answer, we will insert an answer until another one is readily proven. Or sorry, I didn't mean to use prove. Prove is a mathematical term. Until we get evidence of what the actual cause is. So, yes, we don't know what happens after death, which is pretty much, we don't know what's beyond the visible universe. So these great questions, the great questions that have haunted humanity for forever.
And here's an interesting thing. I know I'm not on the board, and Johnny would be pissed if I interjected because it's not my time to speak. You know what? I'll just say this. Continue.
Oh, so yes, we've always done that. But as our understanding of reality grows, as we obtain more evidence, the gaps where God sat, or where gods, multiple gods, whatever primitive man put in there, those gaps are shrinking readily.
All right.
And
go ahead and wrap this point up, and that's going to be the end of the open discussion. We're going to get into the Q&A. So go ahead, finish your point.
As always, science does not seek to disprove God, but as we understand more, as science explores and understands more about the universe, it is not science's fault that God continues to fail to show up.
Okay. Let's see what we got going on here. Golly, I never know where I am anymore. Kind of just here.
Wherever you are.
That's right. I am where I am. All right. So Jeff, did you want to take a quick minute to respond to what JL just said, or do you want to go ahead and get into the Q&A?
I'll just say in brief that I think a God of the Gaps is a bad idea. It doesn't reflect my belief system, and I don't think it reflects everyone's belief systems. I've met a number of intellectual Christians that would agree with me, and I think that's a bad perception of Christianity as a whole. Certainly describes some of Christianity, but it does not describe all of Christianity. I'll leave it at that.
All right. So here we go. We're gonna kind of take this little bit by little bit. I'm just gonna put some questions out there, and we'll see where this takes us. So ultimately, where does morality come from? And I'm going to post this to JL, and then we'll go over to Jeff.
Ultimately, the morality that we possess is rooted in behavioral traits that we adopted to survive as a social species, and then our moral frameworks that grow from that. From the abstract idea of morality itself, those behaviors are subjective from society to society, depending upon what they held as more important or less important. But ultimately, they derive from the behaviors that we learned to survive as a species.
So, are you suggesting that morality is innate?
The behaviors are innate. The social behaviors are innate. Morality is the abstract idea that we apply to that. So that's hence the subjective nature of it, just because we're simply applying a subjective framework to those.
Okay, Jeff, what do you have to say about that?
I personally would say that humanity's sense of morality is innate to human nature, not its understanding of morality. Um, from a more faith-based perspective, I think a more accurate reflection of my beliefs is that morality is indeed objective. But can it be defined? Actually, if you look to early Christian scriptures and the Gospels, it kind of sort of leaves it undefined. There's a lot of mystery involved, searching for the kingdom of God, and it doesn't really fill in the gaps. It leaves it as a mystery to be defined.
All right. Okay. All right. So here we go. Now, Jeff, this one's for you specifically, and I kind of want to hear what you have to say about this. So, does Christianity have to be true for morality to be true?
Not from a rational basis, I would say not necessarily. From a faith basis, yeah, I would say yes.
Okay. All right. And then to caveat off of that, JL, this one is at you. Morality is a product of... so morality being a product of evolution, is evolution a necessity?
Let's kind of... I'm trying to understand the question. Is evolution... are you asking if evolution is a necessity for morality to arrive?
Well, for morality, as you have described it, is evolution a necessity?
I don't think that it's a necessity for it. I think that morality, the abstract idea, is an end result of our evolution. But I couldn't say that one I couldn't say that morality is contingent upon evolution. It just happens to be in our sample size of one, which is Homo sapiens. We see that that's the end result, but we cannot absolutely say that it is a cause. Well, we can't absolutely say it is a contingent result, but there is definitely a causal relationship there.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. What else we got going on? I know Sean's got some questions. He's going to hit them up here in a minute. Let's see. Okay, so we talked about paradoxical existence when we talked about, or when you guys talked about the... if all things being equal, if we all created from the same thing, would we just kind of repeat? Would we be the same person we are today had the same thing happen to us, or materialistically, I believe is where that was going. So, are you suggesting that we are in a paradoxical existence, or would you say that we're more chaotic, that we kind of are the product of not just experience and not just well, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is right this very second. So basically, what predestiny versus free will, I think, is ultimately what the question is asking.
So, I'm sorry, were you asking me first?
Yes, because I believe you're the one that kind of went on to this, where predestiny, I think it was kind of what you were getting on, yes?
Well, certainly it's related to the Christian faith. I wasn't necessarily referring to predestination, but it's a related subject. I'm sorry, can you restate the question for me?
So basically, I think what we're trying to figure out is, are we predetermined to be what we are regardless of experience, or is it more... Are we more shaped by our environment? I guess predestiny, or nature versus nurture in respect to morality.
So you're asking me if I believe in free will.
So yes, we're asking if you believe in free will, and do you believe that, or do you necessarily believe that it's more about morality, how morality fits into the whole free will idea?
Gotcha. I kind of get the impression that morality doesn't really have any meaning apart from free will. I will say that I am as a believer in Christianity, I am somebody who accepts free will. I'm not a Calvinist, and that subject really runs deep. I could not answer it simply.
I mean, that is a pretty complex question. I don't think that's
Yeah.
something that can be answered in a quick, 10-second or 20-second soundbite.
Sure.
Yeah, if you're wanting to dabble into like predestination by all the subatomic particles that came out of the Big Bang that formulated the universe are all traveling in one or in a singular trajectory, and by those trajectories we get causal relations, and through those causal relations everything is pretty much determined from the start of our known reality to this point right now. You could go down that road, or if you're talking about predetermination because God said it this way and this is his plan and we have choice, but the only reason we have free will is because we know of no other way to be, when in actuality it's not free will, it's just set to look like free will. Then you get into kind of like the illusory concepts, but I don't think I believe in a deterministic universe, but we have informed free will. In other words, our choices are narrow. We have the ability to choose, but our choices are narrowed by the experiences that we take into those choices.
Sure.
To me, it sounds like you're sitting on the fence on that one.
Myself?
No, JL. Sounds like JL sitting on the fence on that question.
Well, the function of the universe, we know that the universe functions and moves in a particular way, and we know this demonstrably from evidence. However, we do have the ability to choose between X or Y given any given situation. But there could be a Z choice, but we're not aware of the Z choice simply because we don't have the experience leading into deciding a Z. So the choices that we make are our choice to make, but those are informed choices because we cannot make a choice. If you have no information going in, then it's completely random. Okay, but if you so we tried to get as much as possible. So it's either we either make random choices, which is still our free will to do, but because we don't want to just choose randomly as a behavior, then we make informed choices. So the choices we make are always informed by the things that we have learned, the things we've experienced beforehand. But occasionally we do still choose randomly. So do I believe that we have free will? Yes, but the free will is informed by the things that came before it. There is a causal relationship between our previous experience and the choices we make today. It's not absolute, but it is causal.
Interesting.
Yeah. To some degree, I absolutely agree with that. And can I go ahead and respond? Or
yes, please.
Okay. To some degree, I absolutely agree with that. Some of the best argumentation, actually, for the existence of a prime mover is based on that. I personally am a little open-minded on the subject. I think it really comes down to kind of an interpretation, differences in interpretation. I do think that we, at some point, become self-causing agents. We enter into the chain of causality, and so when we are referring to subjects that relate to what we perceive to be the freedom of our choices that are being made, we're actually referring to our role that we play in it. I'm also open-minded to something like a random number generator that exists that we have not yet fully understood. I do think that there is a degree of non-determinism that enters in through, areas of science that are not yet well understood. Of course, it's unknown, so I can't really ground a lot of argumentation on that. I'm just open-minded about it.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so JL, this one is directed at you. So would DNA point to a potential grand design? If everything starts with, not necessarily starts, but all organic life has some sort of DNA or has a double helix, wouldn't that suggest that there could be some sort of grand design to the whole thing? Not necessarily perfect.
No, it's only evidence of organic chemistry, that the building blocks that composes the amino acids that form DNA came together on this planet, and they simply do that function. So once the amino acids come together, we've demonstrated in the laboratory that they come together, they create this, and then DNA takes over from there, and that's a natural function of that organic chemistry. So if you're talking about abiogenesis, if you're asking how did the amino acids come together, like what was the causal effect, what was the reason that they came together, or what brought them together, we don't entirely know. So, but we're getting there slowly but surely. We'll understand that. So the question of abiogenesis, the logically honest answer, or the intellectually honest answer, is we don't know. But we do know that once those amino acids come together, DNA and everything that proliferated on this life via the environmental the environmental pressures, the evolutionary pressures, this is the end result of it in this sample size of one. It could be the exact same on another planet, but given different evolutionary pressures, life could come out looking entirely different. But we do know that these 4 amino acids brought together form this, and then life just takes off from there. And then evolutionary pressures basically, they pressure what that life is going to evolve into.
Okay. Jeff, did you have anything you want to contribute to that one?
No, not really.
Fair enough.
Sorry.
No, that's fair. All right, and this is the last one that I've got, unless there's some more in the chat, and I think this is more just a funny one. So, JL, you talked about the 2 guys who saw the rustling in the grass, and one guy said that's a lion and took off, and the other guy said no, it's just the wind, and got eaten by the lion. Well, what's to say he couldn't, see the lion and befriend the lion, or see the lion and kill the lion? Why does everything have to be either A or B? Isn't that what we call a false dichotomy?
There are many outcomes that could result from this. I am merely using it as a hyperbolic example. Yes,
but it's a logical fallacy.
It is. Okay. Does it lead? But it does not. I don't believe it. I don't accept that it leads to fallacious reasoning. Is what it is. As simply a hyperbolic example in this particular situation, that we as a species learned to behave in a certain way, and this is probably just one hypothetical example as to how we adopted these behaviors. Is that the same as squirrels run from everything they see? That's a behavioral trait that they have adopted through evolution that has kept that species alive. Regardless of how many cars we put on the road, squirrels are always going to be there because they run from it. Birds fly from everything. They run away. That's how they survive. And us deciding via our pareidolia what to run away from or what not to run away from, that's how we get here. That's how we survive.
Okay. We do have a question from the chat. What are your opinions on the God helmet? This comes from Sean.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm a little behind the times. What is the God helmet? I think I've heard this term before, but
it's also called the Koren Helmet after Stanley Koren.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm not too terribly versed on that either. So
it's basically it's an apparatus that you put. It's basically a helmet that you put on your head that that helps scientists, that helps neurologists study creativity, religious experiences, and the various effects of subtle stimulation on the temporal lobe.
Okay.
May I interject before we go to?
Well, let's let Jeff kind of give his experience or his answer to that.
His experience.
Sorry, I don't know enough about the God helmet to really form a solid opinion about it. I think it's interesting. I would like to see the effects on the temporal lobe as well.
The greatest thing that's come out of that experience is that they've been able to replicate near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences by giving particular stimulation to particular areas of the temporal lobes.
So here's the thing: if anybody has any
effects, we've recreated those spiritual aspects that people feel. It's simply interactions in the temporal lobe.
Okay, so here's the thing: if we have some research equipment or study links to some papers or articles about that, post those in the chat so we can find them and kind of take a look at that here in a bit. Go ahead, Keith.
Yes, I was just gonna say, does the helmets and the we're talking about the temporal lobes and also the fact that humans develop from birth to 15 years old before their frontal lobes are fully developed, and maybe 19 to maybe 20. Do you suggest that we have to get tinfoil and make the helmet?
What?
My goodness, Keith, go back to the closet.
Keith, how do you
Put yourself in the corner.
I gotta legitimately ask, how do you troll your own show?
Guys, well, I troll it because I listen to every single word that comes out of your mouth. Y'all's mouth.
So what happens is we start using really, really big words, and Keith's brain goes, "Ow."
No, it didn't go out. It goes.
There's too many tabs open on his browser.
No, actually, I'm sorry. I'm just hyper intelligent.
Yes,
Sorry,
we'll call it hyperintelligence.
It's been my experience. It's been my experience that those that claim hyperintelligence.
Yeah, keep telling yourself that, Dale.
All right. Well, unless we have any other questions from the peanut gallery, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys kind of just give your closing arguments, and then we'll go to break. You guys are more than welcome to stick around in the background and kind of enjoy the conversation that happens afterwards. Or, I mean, if you have other things that you'd rather be doing, obviously you're more than welcome to take off. No worries. But we're going to continue the show after a break. We'll give you guys, like I said, a couple minutes to kind of wrap up your experiences and your closing statements. Jeff, you being the guest, if you will, please.
Sure. I don't really have any closing arguments to make. I would like to say it's been a little while since I've jumped into this because neurology isn't on the forefront of my agendas to research at the moment.
You've done a fucking outstanding job, bro.
Thanks, I appreciate it. It's been an interesting conversation, an intense one as well, so I do appreciate the challenge. I will say, though, that I believe I've read somewhere, I was reading some neurological, some material on neurology, and I could be wrong about this, but I do think that I distinctly recall reading that the seat of emotions isn't necessarily located in the brain, that there might be some activity that's related to the spine. I'm not sure about that.
You're batting about 9,000, not 10,000, but you're pretty on point. So continue.
Okay, well, I tend to think that there are aspects of the nervous system that are still under investigation. It is not necessarily all related to what's happening with the God Helmet. I'll just leave it at that. Some food for
food for thought. Excellent. All right, JL.
That it is. It really is. That's where we'll put my man. JL.
Basically, my closing would be pretty much just a kind of a re-edification of my argument or a restatement of my argument in that morality is an abstract idea. It falls within the same framework as truth and justice and innocence and guilt. They are abstract frameworks that we apply to the behavioral traits that we are innately born with, the instincts that we have, the behavioral systems that we've employed over 250,000 years to survive on this planet as a social species. we know that given this, they are wholly subjective because they are influenced by our emotional reaction to those behavioral patterns. We can take any kind of objective, or especially God, we can take God out of it, as the emotions that come from the influence of a god can be recreated in a laboratory. Serpent in the chat, he brought up the God helmet, and we know that when we die, the brain floods with DMT, which is what is informed by which causes hallucinations, informed by our imagination. And so
I'm glad you brought that up. Remind me of that before we in this interjection. Because,
you got some?
People need to realize that we do have, natural chemicals within our bodies.
Yes. So to come to truth, to be skeptical and to believe as many or to accept. Sorry, I keep using believe. I keep falling on belief, but to accept as many true things as possible, we have to remain skeptical, and we look at what we can do and what we can recreate and what we can objectively understand. And we see the subjectivity in moral systems across the globe throughout human history.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, with that said, I want to thank both of our guests for stopping by, having this awesome discussion debate on morality.
And stay tuned, guys. We're going to talk a little more while we're on a music break.
Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. It's been amazing, very enlightening to get to that side of the argument. JL, it's always awesome having you here. We're going to take a quick musical break. We'll be back here in just a few minutes, and I feel like I may be playing the wrong song due to the conversation. But here you go.
Johnny, you never do anything wrong.
Or is it the perfect song?
I'll let you guys
Johnny
decide.
never messes up, ever.